Mr. Cheifet, say hello to all of the Linux nerds that are watching you right now.
Hey, Linux nerds and all the other nerds.
Before we get started, I have to say thank you for everything you've done. I don't want to make you feel old, but
Okay.
I was born in 1979, and
Okay.
about the time that I started to become of age to sit down and really do anything with my computers, the Computer Chronicles was on and was almost a religion for me.
Sounds
I
good.
every week watched you and Gary Kildall review and talk to other nerds all over the place on all
Right.
different platforms, and it in many ways inspired almost everything I did thereafter. Um,
That's great.
I got into the software development world and for a lot of reasons because of some of the work that Gary did. And
Sure.
then I transitioned away from software development into a talking head personality, writer, host kind of thing,
hmm
based in a lot of ways on the work that the two of you did throughout the
Great.
Computer Chronicles. So thank you. You realistically, you absolutely changed the course of my life and had no idea that you even did that. So big thanks. Little bit of a fanboy moment here, but thank you for all of that.
Well, it's great to hear, and we get every day. I get emails from people and messages from people saying the same thing, Brian.
It's amazing the
It is.
lasting impact your show has had. Let's start at the beginning. So how did the Computer Chronicles come to be? Because it is the granddaddy of computer shows. I mean,
Yeah.
you really created that entire genre and segment. How
Yeah.
did that happen?
Well, it was very simple. I was a geek back in the early '80s who didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I needed help.
That's fair.
So I used to go to some users group meetings and sit around with 20 guys in some guy's basement and hear what was going on. I thought, this is great stuff. And I thought, what a waste that only 20 people are listening to this. I happened to be
Yeah.
running a TV station at the time in the Silicon Valley. I said, why don't we make a TV show out of these users group meetings? That was the really original idea. And it was really to help me as just a geek user.
Right.
And so we started out actually in, I guess it was 1982. We launched a local live 1 hour TV show on my station in San Mateo, California.
Nice.
To do early technology live on TV was quite a challenge.
Yeah, that's gutsy.
That's why we took an hour, not a half hour, because it took twice as long to get these things to work. Jim Warren was actually the original host of the show when it was a local show in the Bay Area. Jim Warren, people may know, was one of the early founders of this whole personal computer bit. He
Yep.
started the very first trade show, the West Coast Computer Fair.
Yep.
And basically, Jim would bring in his buddies every Thursday night live, 8 to 9, on my TV station, and they would talk about this stuff. And this is a thing that went viral before anybody had ever heard the word viral. I started getting, there was no internet at the time, but there were bulletin boards.
Yeah.
And I started getting messages from guys saying, we hear there's this damn show called Computer something or other that explains this stuff. How do I get to watch it? And these guys then started calling their local PBS station saying, how do we get to watch this thing? So literally by answering the phone, we had requests from 30 different stations around the country to carry the show. So I thought, this might be a good idea.
Yeah, maybe,
So
right?
let's work on. So we decided to develop, put more production value into the show, trim it down to a half hour, which was more appropriate for national TV broadcast,
Right.
and started the process of finding the money to do it because this is not an inexpensive show to do. I mean, people think it was my show. I mean, I had 20 people working with me that helped put the show together.
Wow.
And we found the money, partly thanks to a guy named Gary Kildall. Gary actually, well, it's a long story. I can tell you a lot about Gary. Gary actually was our first donor. He gave us a small seed grant of $25,000. He said, this is a great idea. You should do it. Here's some money to get you started.
Well, that's awesome.
We used
I didn't know
we used
that.
that money from Gary to then raise real money, which we got from a British company called Micro Focus, our first big sponsor. We
As
did.
a side note, I currently work at Micro Focus.
No kidding.
Yeah, I really do. Yeah, I work for a Linux company called SUSE that was acquired by Micro Focus about a year ago.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they were really great. They had just gone public. They had a lot of cash, and nobody had ever heard of them in the United States. They were a British company. And they gave us the funding to start the first year. So thanks to Gary, thanks to Microfocus, we got the funds to put this together, and just wouldn't die after that.
And it's amazing. It still lives on. It's stellar how many people still watch the old episodes on YouTube or archive.org or whatnot. Even I just a couple of weeks ago, before I reached out to you, I was watching an episode on the Apple II GS from 1988, I believe, and I was enthralled. It's an amazing. It's become a sort of a time capsule of computer history at this point, of the personal computer revolution. It really does chronicle it almost from the beginning all the way through into the 90s. It's amazing.
What's amazing about being online is a couple of things. Number one, of course, it's global now. It's not just a show in the United States. And I get mail from 16-year-olds saying, this stuff is so cool. I never really knew what was going on before I was born, like you probably.
Yeah.
And I get mail from 75-year-olds saying, so great to think about those good old days. So it astonishes me the range of people who still watch. And of course, far more people have seen the show online than ever saw it on television in the first place, even though we were on around the world for many, many years.
You were. Yeah. I was watching in the Sacramento Valley area for many years, from the late 80s through the 90s. And the impact it had was just phenomenal. So how at its height, how many stations were you on? Like how broad?
Well, we
was your
started
reach?
with these 30 stations who had called me, basically. We had no marketing, no sales, no business development. We all worked for nothing, basically. This was a hobby to start the show. I mean, I've never made a nickel on this show, actually.
Really?
Really?
I mean, that's amazing to me, considering the absolute phenomenon that it is, that you've never heard a nickel.
It was a hobby.
Selling.
I've never got a nickel for doing these shows, right? But it was fun, right? I mean, look at all the people I got to meet. Anyhow, so we started out with the core 30 stations in the first year. And then, as I mentioned, it just grew like mad, started getting more calls. By the end of the first year, we were on 100 stations in the country. By the end of the second year, we were on 200 stations in the country. Wow. By the end of the third year, 250 stations. And in the fourth year, we got interest from international, and we created Spanish, French, and Arabic versions of the show. And we were on in 100 countries around the world. So it was 250 stations in this country, another 100 stations around the world, weekly audience of probably 3 million people. It was really revolutionary at the time.
Honestly, even nowadays, those are numbers and reach that, even most successful tech YouTubers could only dream of. I mean, that's the fact that you achieved that before the internet really took off is amazing.
It really is. I mean, as I say, it really invented the word viral.
It did. And when I first started doing technology shows, me and my co-host of the show I was doing at the time, we sat down and we watched Computer Chronicles back to back. We marathoned episodes, looking at the early stuff, the newer stuff. We watched, the Net Cafe. We watched everything to see how you did it. How do you put together a show that is fun to watch now and fun to watch 20 years after it's made, and still haven't perfected that, but we keep watching and I keep analyzing how you pulled this off.
Yeah, it is amazing that we did it, actually. And, keeping it going for 20 years was not easy, by the way, because we had to cost a lot of money and a lot of people to support. And we were in the public television world. I mean, this was not a commercial enterprise.
Right.
So it was quite a challenge, and it's kind of a miracle that it really happened and succeeded as much as it did. I never imagined that I'd be talking in 2017 about this show.
Right.
That they'd even be online. I assumed it was just dead stuff. Thank God we saved all this stuff. And thank God we were finding a way to put it online.
Thank God. Now, how do you feel about it all being online? I assume that you like it. It's everywhere. So many creators, aren't quite certain if they want their stuff spread so freely, but I assume you're okay with it.
Well, that was a really tough call, to tell you the truth. We had a lot of meetings about this. That you're going to give this stuff away? And I said, well, look, that was Gary's idea in the first place. Let's help people understand this stuff better. So I felt an obligation to Gary, who by this time was not alive anymore,
right,
when we put the stuff online. And it actually ended up, also I was doing some work with the Internet Archive, and I sort of got into that sort of freeware mentality and working with people who had done this before. And it just seemed the right thing to do. Now, again, the stuff that's up now, technically the stuff that's online is only for non-commercial use.
Right.
But everything you see on YouTube was pirated. I've had nothing to do with the whole YouTube collection.
But the stuff on archive.org, that's more
official.
sanctioned. Okay.
Stuff on YouTube is total pirated. I have nothing to do with it. The show has nothing to do with that. It's just users, fans put that stuff together.
That's fantastic. When I basically take the same approach. All of my shows go up. We release it under a Creative Commons non-commercial license. Exactly. That way, if you want to make money off it, you got to toss me an email and work with me. But if you're learning, spread it far and wide. I love that approach.
That was our philosophy. It actually worked out very well. I mean, the fact is, people do see it around the world now, so it's great for the industry. It's great for us who all worked on this show, and we're in the business of licensing footage for commercial purposes.
Sure.
So we use our archive, as a business. It's not a big business, but right now we're working with CNN, for example. They're doing a show on tech in the 90s coming up in June. They'll use a lot of our stuff. The show they did last year on tech in the 80s used a lot of our stuff.
Right.
So we get involved in, documentaries and special features and so on, stuff like that. So we do the tiny, tiny business of licensing this stuff. Amazingly, most people are honest.
That is kind of amazing.
Generally, I get an email from somebody around the world that says, we'd like to use some of your stuff. Is that okay? Most cases, they don't have budget, so we say, sure. But if we're dealing with a big media company, we charge them.
Good. That makes sense to me. So what happened? So it ran. How many years total did Computer Chronicles
20 years.
Run? 20 years.
20 years national, 1 year local. So 21 years altogether.
Phenomenal.
Yep.
We
did over almost 600 shows.
That is amazing. That is absolutely amazing.
Every week for 20 years.
That's dedication. That's
hard work.
A huge part of your life. When you stopped doing the Computer Chronicles, what year did you end there? Was it 96?
2003.
2003.
Yeah.
Yes.
The last show was probably the end of 2002. I think it was off the air in January 2003.
Why? What was the motivation when you ended it? What was your thought process like? Was it just time to do something else?
A little bit of that. It was a combination of things. The whole computer industry had changed by then.
Quite a lot. Yeah.
Everybody had a computer, so our big sort of advertising advantage was good. There was no people that needed to be told to buy a computer. Computers were now appliances. I remember talking with a guy at the time was editor of Macworld magazine, and he said, when computers become like refrigerators, we're both out of business. And he was right.
Yeah.
When we started the show, it was complicated to figure out a PC.
It was.
You had to look it up and so much stuff you had to know. Now you just, plug and play and go. So they didn't need us as much. That was one part of it. Secondly, 2002 was a really rough year in the business. That was right after the dot-com bust.
Yep.
It was very hard to get money in the Silicon Valley at that time. Things got a little boring. Microsoft now owned the software world.
Yeah.
And IBM owned the hardware world. IBM and Apple owned the hardware world, mostly IBM. Things weren't really as exciting anymore. It was, again, pre-internet, basically.
Right.
Not big internet yet. Just internet had just started. And I was tired. I've been doing a show every week for 20 years. That was a lot of work, a lot of concentration, and especially not only on the content side, but on the business side. Keeping this business running, which is essentially what it was. Right. It was a lot of work, and I kind of needed a break, and so combination of things got together, and I said, let me take a break.
Wow. In an age when, a 10-year run for a sitcom is considered legendary, that's hitting 21 years is absolutely stellar.
The other thing happened, too, with the internet, Brian.
Yeah.
There were all these little guys doing their shows in the garage.
Right.
And so we had hundreds of low-cost competitors now, which I thought sort of weakened the image of the kind of show we were doing.
Yeah.
And it put a lot of pressure on us to really have high production values to compete with all that stuff.
And you did. You did pull that off. There still is nothing quite like
nobody's ever done quite what we did. I know.
No, it isn't. And, there's a few of the commercial competitors that came along, like the Tech TVs and the G4s and whatnot.
All folded.
They all folded. And none of them... And they all had their beautiful qualities. They all Absolutely. Did, but they all lacked that comfortable spark. There was that something about the Computer Chronicles where it felt like when you and Gary were sitting across the table from two people who were clearly very nerdy people who were uncomfortable being on camera, but you walked them through showcasing a new thing for CPM or whatever, there was something magical about seeing that happen that just never seemed to happen on the other shows that seemed to crop up later on.
I think one of the reasons was, frankly, I was not only the host of the show, I was a viewer. I was a user. I was doing the show for me.
Right.
So I really cared about this stuff. I wasn't doing it for money. I wasn't doing it for anything else. I wanted to find out this information. So I really represented the viewer of the show. I mean, the viewers and I were the same. So I think it had that kind of personal help me appeal. I wasn't just some MC, you know. I mean, I really wanted to find out what was going on. Of course, Gary was superior at helping me out with the guy who really knew this stuff.
I mean, he was Gary Kildall. I mean, he's a legend in the entire industry. I mean, computers wouldn't be what computers are if Gary Kildall hadn't been around. I mean, the fact that we don't have him around anymore is a huge loss just for everybody. But
I got to tell you something rather interesting. I just happened, this friend just sent me a real estate listing, Gary's house in Pacific Grove, the original offices for DRI.
The old DRI house?
Yep.
Really?
Up for sale in Pacific Grove. I was really tempted.
Oh man. I remember
that's a bit of history there.
That's a huge bit of history.
Yep. It should be a museum. I don't know about just selling it as a house, but it should be a museum.
They should convert it to just like a computer museum with half of it dedicated to GEM and everything else. Memorial
site or something. Yeah.
I know it. I'm always amazed at how few people, a lot of younger viewers watch my show. I mean, I'm not entirely a spring chicken, but, I'm kind of on the younger end of things.
Sure.
But people watch my show who were born in the late 80s, early 90s now, and they have no idea who Gary was. And they don't know what CPM was. They don't know what GEM was. They had never heard of crazy things like concurrent DOS. Like, that's just a crazy idea to them. And it's so sad that a part of that history isn't being just taught to these kids. I feel like there should be a computer science class about it.
When Gary was alive, it drove him crazy.
I'm sure it did.
It drove him to his end. Not only crazy, but I mean, it's what ended his life so early, really. His frustration with how he sort of got shuffled in the bottom of the pile somewhere.
He did. He absolutely did. I mean,
it really, really hurt him.
That is terribly sad to hear.
Terribly sad. Terribly sad.
It's good that we have those old Computer Chronicles to go look at, to watch you and Gary talking with people about it. It's just phenomenal. When you look back at the earlier Computer Chronicle days, is there a moment that you look back at as the most fond moment for you? Like, is there a time when it was the most fun or the most exciting, or when you were playing with something that was the most just cool or interesting or fun for you?
Well, there were a lot of sort of key moments. The most memorable moments are the times things didn't work, actually. Because you know what it's like. I mean, with a classic line of a guest who would come into the show and say, well, it worked perfectly in my hotel room last night. Just doesn't work now for some reason.
Surprise.
Yeah, we had a lot of disasters on the show, and that was a lot of grief and aggravation there. But I would say, we shot every other Saturday. We used to shoot 2 shows a day every other Saturday.
Yeah.
And number one, the fact that just simply Gary showed up in the morning was a thrill. It wasn't easy. Gary was living 100 miles away.
Yeah, he used to drive down the coast, didn't he, to get to the show?
Gary had to take off one day of his 2-day weekend, a hardworking guy,
yeah,
drive either in his Lamborghini up to our studio in San Mateo or fly his plane to the San Carlos airport.
That's right. I forgot he was a pilot. Yeah.
Yeah, the commitment Gary made to the show inspired me every single day. I mean, just to see him show up and give what he gave to us, to the viewers, I mean, it got me choked up every single time I saw him. I mean, he was incredible gentleman, incredible good guy, with unfortunately had lots of issues. So I would say every day was great. And just, being at the cutting edge, or I think what we call probably the bleeding edge at the time of all this new stuff that was coming out, to get to see this stuff before anybody else did as a geek, that was pretty damn exciting. And to meet all these famous people who are in the industry and to talk to them and pick their brains. So it really, I wouldn't say one moment, but I'd say there were 500 moments over 20 years.
Awesome. That is purely awesome. Is being someone who every week was on the air, essentially you covered every type of hardware and OS release that came out in that time.
Yep.
Is there a golden age in there? Is there a time when you look at computing and you're like, this is when it was at its most fun? Is it now? Is it then? Is it the mid-90s?
It's both. Obviously, those 20 years were seminal years for the personal computer, no question about it. I mean, every year during that 20-year period, really cool, great new things were happening.
Yeah, it was constant change.
And then, as I said, it slowed down for a while. But today we have things we never dealt with then. I mean, wireless and internet and mobile and I mean all the crazy social media. We didn't have any of that in those days. I often think now, God, if we only had social media when I was doing Chronicles, what a different job we would have done at the time.
Oh man, yeah, you would have owned the internet at that point.
Yes,
there's no doubt.
I don't know if you know this. Most people don't. But the first television show to ever be streamed on the web was Computer Chronicles.
No, really?
First on the thing was called the M-Bone at the time. Back in the late 1980s, we were the first television show to ever be streamed on the web.
I had no idea.
Nobody knows about this.
In the late 80s?
I guess it was 88, 89. There was a guy in Washington, what the hell is his name? Carl Malamud, who had put together this M-Bone thing. Yeah. And he wanted a test. Can we actually do a half-hour television show and feed it through the streaming device? And can we try a Computer Chronicles episode? I said, you betcha.
Yeah.
And there it was. The very first TV show on the web was Computer Chronicles.
That's amazing. I had no idea.
Nobody knows about
I need to look that up. I need to try and get a hold of that guy because that is fantastical.
Right.
Honestly, the first time I ever even remember something streaming on the web was probably the mid-90s, the first time I really saw it happening.
Yes. When it really, I guess, the big deal was, of course, that first concert by the Rolling Stones.
Yes.
Which we featured on the Net Cafe show, by the way.
That's right.
And a local band called, what was the name of that group now? There's a local bunch of geeks in the Valley who had formed a band, Severe Tire Damage. Group called Severe Tire Damage. And they were actually the opening act online for that famous Rolling Stones concert.
Wow.
And so Severe Tire Damage was the first live band performance on the web, which preceded the Rolling Stones performance.
That's a pretty cool feather to have in your hat.
Yes, it is.
That's a very cool
thing. We actually have tape on the Net Cafe show of that appearance by Severe Tire Damage and an interview with those guys.
I should look that up.
You got to look it up.
Is that on archive.org as well, by any chance?
Archive.org, yeah, on Net Cafe.
It's absolutely fantastic. For everyone watching, I'll put a link to the archive.org stuff so you can go check it out.
Yeah, it's a pretty famous show, actually.
That is amazing. I have so many things going through my head right now.
Yeah.
So, and I really want to get your thoughts on a bunch of things. So with where we're at right now, 2017, with you've been doing it for all this time, you've seen everything there is to see in the personal computer revolution. Where do you think we're headed? Like, I know that's a broad question, but with every change that's happened and every bit of craziness that's occurred and every up and down of different companies and operating systems, where do you think we're headed?
In general terms, artificial intelligence, robots, speech, new interfaces. I mean, I don't think we'll recognize a computer 10 years from now. I think what's happening, it amazes me actually, virtual reality too. I mean, we did a show 20 years ago on virtual reality. Nobody ever heard of the term at the time.
You did.
And it didn't work too easily, believe me. But I think things like VR, that really interests me. I'm really concerned about issues of privacy right now online. I'm concerned about fake news online. I was shocked to see a study that showed the majority of young people get their news on Facebook. That's a bit scary.
That's a little bit scary.
There's a lot of issues to be resolved here in the future, but I think, and AI is great, but I mean there are lots of issues there. But I think robots and AI, that's the future, no question about it. I think that's the exciting stuff that really interests me, combined with the downside of that, which is really the privacy, the security, and the legitimacy issues. Because once you got this, all these computers running everything, you still need some human intervention.
You do.
And also I don't think most people have a clue as to how they're spied on online. I used to give speeches. I used to say, suppose you were in a mall, physical mall, and you're walking down one of the corridors there, and behind you is a guy in a raincoat with a hat on and a little notepad taking notes and following you as you walk around. You'd probably call the cops. That is happening every second right now when you're online.
Right. Most of my friends have an Amazon Echo or the Google Home service.
Of course.
And they just
Absolutely.
walk around the house. Hey, Alexia, play this song for me. Buy
too.
me a thing on the internet. And it's listening all the time. And people don't think anything of it.
I know. But I mean, the whole world of algorithms running everything it's wonderful, but it's kind of scary at the same time. So I just hope we manage this well.
Do you use those sorts of services within your
all
own
of them, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So you're very well surveilled.
No kidding. Yeah, I think about it. There's been a famous case with Amazon's Echo just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Was subpoenaed to get their records of what this guy said before he murdered somebody.
Right.
Because his Echo was on inside the house. Yeah, I mean, the privacy issue is really, really, really big right now. I think people, and sites like Facebook and Google wouldn't exist except for the fact that people give them all their information and all their content.
Do you think it's something that can be solved? I mean, is that something that we can solve, or is it just a fundamental issue we have to live with if we want this sort of functionality?
It's a really good question. I don't know. I don't think it can be solved. Frankly, there's so much money invested in the current kinds of things, the way we do things. I mean, the internet is an advertising medium right now. It's not a content medium anymore.
Right.
I absolutely get driven nuts at these forced interstitial ads that come on when I click and I want to see something. And instead, I've got to watch a 30-second commercial. Smoke comes out of my ears, and I can't stand it.
It just drives a man to murder, doesn't it?
I keep on arguing there should be a PBS for the internet. A separate place to go without commercials. I'm willing to pay for it, just like I pay for cable or anything else.
Right.
Just leave me alone.
Right. A commercial-free, DRM-free corner of the internet.
Yes.
I would love that.
We need a safe place.
Yeah. I mean, right now what we've got is Wikipedia and archive.org, basically.
You got it.
How did you first learn about archive.org? You got all those videos up there. What got you involved on that side?
Well, it's a very interesting story, actually. When we were doing the Net Cafe show, one of our guests in one of the shows was Brewster Kahle from Internet Archive.
Yeah.
In the early days of Internet Archive, it was really the Wayback Machine.
Yes.
They were really just literally archiving the internet. Brewster's brilliant idea was, well, we keep copies of books and newspapers and magazines and libraries. The most important source of information these days is web pages. Why don't we keep them? And he did the numbers and he figured out it's not that hard to do. And so he started out archiving web pages. I mean, every day their crawlers would go around and make copies of pages, put them on the Wayback Machine. So it was pretty exciting at the time. So I was interviewing Brewster on Net Cafe about what he was doing with the Wayback Machine. And after I did the interview on the camera, we went to the side in the studio and we sat down and chatted a bit. And I said, Brewster, I have an interesting problem. Let me see if you're interested in helping me. I've got hundreds of hours of great, unique, classic stuff on the history of the personal computer revolution, and nobody can access it. It's sitting on tapes on a shelf, dead.
Right, and eventually will rot because of the film.
Yes, exactly. With what you're doing on the archive, would you be interested in adding video, television shows, our show, so people could access it? To his credit, he said, yes, and we'll pay for it. This is a good guy. We spent 2 years digitizing all our shows, 2-inch tapes, 1-inch tapes, 3/4-inch tapes, half-inch tapes. It was a monster task with old technology. I mean, it's not like we digitize today. No. We were running 3/4-inch pneumatic decks.
Hey, you weren't just ripping DVDs. You were. No, that's hard work.
Hard work. And it was a phenomenal contribution that Archive made to us, actually. And eventually we put that all up online. And that's how it happened. And then actually, after I stopped doing Chronicles, I actually went to work with the Archive to do for other collections what we had done together for Computer Chronicles.
Oh, that's fantastical.
Yeah,
I had no idea you did some of that work.
That's fantastic. I mean, after we finished with the Chronicles, actually Brewster gave me a call and he said, you did such a great job with this Chronicle stuff online. Would you help us do it with other rich media, audio and video? So, hell of an idea. I spent 2 or 3 years with them. And actually, one of the great projects we did two interesting stories while I was at the Archive. Yeah. One is we had a unique deal with NASA. I was a big space nut.
Of course. You're a good American nerd. Of course you were.
And so I was scanning the web one day, and I see this RFP, request for proposal, from NASA. Is there somebody out there who would like to help us build an online site for all our video and audio? I said, hey, that's what we do at the archive. Let's bid on this thing. There was no money involved, but whoever did the deal got the right to use all the content.
Right.
To use all the content of the space program,
Oh,
that's worth
my.
a fortune. So got our people at the archive together, and we put together this proposal. We never thought we had a chance. We were up against big companies.
Yeah.
We were this little nonprofit, running out of a small place in San Francisco. And a couple months went by, and one day I get a call from the lady in charge of NASA, said, would you like to do it? We're going to pick you. I said, oh my God.
Of course.
And I spent one of the best years of my life the next year running around the country, visiting all the NASA centers, meeting with all the NASA people, finding out what they had. I mean, it was an incredible experience for a space nut, for a space geek, no question about it. And we actually put this deal together. It was the first time NASA had ever contracted with a non-governmental party to do something like this. So it was a spectacular experience we had there. And again, most people now, ironically, I had left the archive shortly after that, and archive never followed through and finished that project, much to my great sadness.
That's a bummer.
Just 2 weeks ago, NASA announced they put up their new site of all the audio and video from the collection. So it's actually real now as of a couple of weeks ago.
That's good.
So we accomplished something. I can tell you, and I went around to all these NASA centers, there's 10 of them around the country, and I would see rusty cans of film. I literally had tears in my eyes. This is the history of the space program. I mean, these things are rotting. Right. You've got to do something with this. Digitize it. Put it online.
The biggest moments in humanity are just sitting there.
Absolutely. So that was one of my great happy moments working with the archive. One of the less happy moments is some people may remember there was something on the archive when they first got into the audio and video business called open source video. Open source video was Brewster's idea again because costs had gone way down in terms of bandwidth and storage. If you want to post a video online, do it for free, anything you want, no curation, we'll put it up there, we'll host it for you. This was YouTube, but it wasn't YouTube.
Right.
And it was very successful, but it was very geeky. It wasn't a friendly user interface, but the potential was phenomenal. I sat down with the people at the archive. I said, this is a hell of an idea. We got to push this open source video thing. Change the name, change the interface. This will be you. Who wants to watch videos of cats? Who wants to watch people's personal videos? This is not a business.
Oh, no.
I said, trust me. Actually, the YouTube guys actually called me at the time when they were putting YouTube together because we had this great collection of content. Yeah. They were starting from zero. They said, you want to work together, use some of your old content, Never worked out. YouTube, launched YouTube, killed open source video, basically, got sold to Google for $1.6 billion.
Yeah.
That was a bad day.
That's a bad day. That is a bad day. You know, still to this day, you know, I've done interviews with a couple of people who don't want their content up on YouTube. Like I did an interview with Richard Stallman a few months back, and you know, he does not. YouTube uses some not free software in their website, so he doesn't like it up there. But archive.org, we can post it all up there. So thank goodness archive.org still exists and still is available for that sort of stuff. Just for that, if nothing else.
Yeah.
What, and this is a little bit less historically interesting, but I've got to ask. I have to ask because I ask almost all my guests. Right now, when you look down at your computer, what are you running? What operating system, what machine you got, man? I got to hear about it.
MacBook Air right now.
A MacBook Air.
But I have a lot of different computers around here.
Yeah. So what is your what operating systems are you running? Give me the gamut. What are you working on right now?
Well, obviously I've got a PC, you know, running Windows 10. Got to know what that's going on there. I've got my Mac Air. I have my MacBook Pro. It's a long story about me and Apple, but I was never a big Apple fan in the early days, based on some experiences I had with Steve Jobs and Apple. Yeah. So it took me a while to come around, but I got the iPhone, I've got the iPod, I've got the iPad. I'm all in the whole world now. So I've come around, and I'd have, if you want to look at my garage, I've got Amigas, I've got Apple IIs, I've got everything you can think of. So I've been through all of them right now, but as a practical day-to-day matter, yeah, I'm using my MacBook Air.
You know, it's funny. I went the exact opposite direction. I spent a lot of my younger days. I did the Apple thing. I went to every WWDC I could.
Right.
I drank that Kool-Aid, and I drank it good and fast. And nowadays I'm all Linux and FreeBSD and things like that around here. Yeah.
I don't think I'm geeky enough to do Linux, you know.
Oh, no. Oh, my good sir. You absolutely are. But just the same, I respect your decision on that one. All is forgiven.
Offense.
All is forgiven here. Normally,
Okay.
we hold Apple usage against our guests, but not you, my man.
Okay, thank you.
So in your earlier days, as you were producing the Computer Chronicles, clearly you'd be using computers in some of the production work or in your home life. What were you using back then? I mean, like throughout the 80s, when you were sitting there to type it up, what did you use?
When I started Computer Chronicles, I was using a TRS-80 Model 1.
Oh, good man. Good
Learning
machine.
to program in BASIC.
Yes.
Very proud of the fact that I actually created a Yahtzee program
Nice.
on the TRS-80, and it was an eye-opener for me because I learned how hard it was to translate human knowledge to computer knowledge. Yahtzee was all about what number is bigger, right?
Yeah.
I immediately knew that 4 was bigger than 3, but to tell a computer how to conclude that 4 is bigger than 3 was complicated. And I realized it was this tremendous gap between my brain and the computer's brain. And I had to figure out how to translate that in simple terms. And that was totally eye-opening for me. I just loved that experience of figuring out how to tell a computer to understand something I already understood. So I started with TRS-80. I had an Apple II after that. And you name it, I mean, as it came out, I had it. You know?
Yeah, and you started with Matthew Broderick's Computer from War Games, which, as you know, almost started World War III. So that's a lot of power in your hands.
Yeah. So, I mean, the good thing doing the show, of course, we got to see all the new stuff, and people would send us all this stuff. So I played with virtually everything. I was really big into early video games. I have things people have never heard of. The Magnavox Odyssey video game.
The Odyssey is great. I've got an Odyssey 2 downstairs.
Fairchild video game system. I still have these things.
The Channel F. Nice one.
Yeah. Exactly. So, I mean, I was like totally into all this stuff. And I have a collection. I could fill a closet full of handheld devices I have from every little gadget that's ever came out. I just love this stuff. I mean, to me, it's just fun. I mean, it's just great toys.
Are there any of the older machines that you still actually use ever, or do you mostly use just modern hardware at this point?
That's a really good question. I occasionally use my Amiga because it's still one of the great machines in the world.
Which Amiga were you running?
Oh, I had a whole bunch of them. I guess I was last running the Amiga 2000. I guess
that's a good machine.
And there were games on the Amiga at the time you couldn't duplicate anywhere.
It was beautiful.
One of my favorite games is what the heck was it called? I can't remember right now. There was a game on the Amiga that they tried to come out with it for the PC. They tried to come out. It was never as good as it was in terms of the graphics and the sound on the Amiga.
It's so obvious that way. Yeah. Cannon Fodder and Defender of the Crown and the Rocket game. There was just so many great ones for the Amiga that were amazing.
So, I mean, I have a very emotional attachment. Of course, we had Jack Tramiel on the show at one point, and that was a real thrill for me.
That's
meeting
cool.
the guy. He was a character, and he had, of course, worked with Gary for a while. So that's how I got to meet Jack.
Really?
Yes, Gary would work with Jack. They couldn't be more opposite people. I mean, Jack was not a technologist. He was pure bottom line business guy. I mean, he was selling toasters. You know.
Yeah.
And Gary was up here in the sky somewhere thinking about the next code he was going to write. But these guys got along, and that was one of the great shows. I think we had Jack Tramiel there explaining what he was doing with Atari and what he was doing with Commodore. Another interesting point, we've done 500-600 shows.
Yeah.
To this day, the most popular show in terms of online views and downloads, the Commodore 64 show.
It's an iconic machine.
Yes.
I mean, it's
unbelievable.
It is the Commodore. I mean,
unbelievable.
Even kids nowadays know what a Commodore 64 is.
Yeah,
even if they've never had the pleasure of using one, they know what it is.
Yeah. So anyhow, in terms of old stuff, I do play with my Amiga every now and then because it's just so fun.
Yeah.
What's the other oldest thing I play with? Well, I have so much old stuff around. You've got to keep the stuff working is the issue.
It's hard.
But I probably have traded in all my old stuff for newer stuff right now in terms of gadgets I use.
Yeah. Most
You know what I mean?
I'm the same way. I run a lot of emulators here and there just because I can, just for the heck of it.
Yeah.
So what
Lemmings, by the way, is the game Lemmings on the Amiga, superior.
A bar above. I mean, yeah,
Absolutely.
I totally agree.
Nobody ever duplicated that.
No one did. They did a couple of okay ports, but they were never as good. They never looked right. They didn't have that same sound. There was the sound was wrong.
And the speed and the responsiveness on the Amiga version of Lemmings was just perfect.
Yes, you're totally
They
right.
never equaled that on a lot of these other versions they tried.
When I look back, I do miss the old days when there was so many competing complete ecosystems.
Yep.
And unique machines that would come out and exist for 5, 6, 7 years before they'd be end of life. The fact that you could get an Amiga 1200 for almost a decade was amazing. And it was still a usable, fun, enjoyable machine. And it just got cheaper with more and more games and applications for it. I miss that. I do miss that.
It's a different business now completely.
It is. It almost moves too fast for my old fuddy-duddy ways. I kind of want to tell all these newfangled kids to get off my lawn and bring me a machine and never update my OS for 5 or 6 years. And then when I see like a new graphical operating system come out on Computer Chronicles, then I'll go grab the new version of Gem or something.
Right.
Is there I kind of want to ask you about kind of what you're up to now and what you've got going on.
Yeah.
But first, is there any system, any operating system that you feel didn't get its fair shake, that you feel was great and could have been the big thing, that just got crushed by Windows or whatever else and just went away? Is there any one that you would have
Gem is probably number one. Gary used to go crazy that he didn't get any recognition for what he did with Gem, Graphical Environment Manager.
Yeah.
Gem was pretty damn good, and it was sort of ahead of Windows at the time.
It was.
But he wasn't Microsoft at the time, and it was pretty hard to compete. So certainly, CPM and Gem, these are pretty great accomplishments in software development. And then Gary also, I still have the very first digital encyclopedia on a Laserdisc. It came out of Gary's company.
Really?
Walter's Encyclopedia on a Laserdisc.
I didn't even realize they did that.
They did. It was spectacular at the time. Can you imagine random searching a Laserdisc for terms?
That's amazing.
It didn't exist before. So that was a pretty exciting moment right there. That's a piece of old technology.
Yeah.
And I still have a Laserdisc player, by the way.
Well, it's the best way to watch Star Wars, so you got to keep one around.
Well, the sad thing is it's not. The resolution is terrible on those old Laserdisc players. Put in a DVD, it's so much crisper.
It is sad.
I know. I mean, it's monster disc, and the resolution was pretty lousy. But yeah, I have a whole collection of laser discs. Nobody wants them.
One day, someone will really want them.
I hope so.
Have you ever seen? There's an open source project that's OpenGem. That's basically an open source kind of free software implementation of Gem at this point.
Right.
Every now and then, I fire that up just to kind of putz around with how it was, around 88 or so. And I'm always blown away by how far ago that was, and yet how little far we've come in so many ways. Right. Really all of computing was right there. It was all working. It was, we had multiple layered windows, and we had multitasking going on in a certain degree, and we had a lot of cool graphics going on, and we haven't really changed all that much in a lot of ways from my fuddy-duddy way of looking at things. And
Gary frankly used to go nuts when we would have the latest version of Windows on the show. Every once in a while, if you watch Computer Chronicles, Gary would be on the other side of the table.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to be a guest. He said, "You're not doing Windows without letting me talk about Gem."
Good man.
And he would go rabid about that.
I always marvel at when you'd have I'm trying to think. I think it was the concurrent DOS episode you guys did, where Gary was not the guest; he was on your side of the desk as the host. I always marveled at how restrained he was. Like he held himself
it was an
back.
amazing feat. I know. Inside, he was burning. I can tell you that.
Oh, I would have leapt across the desk like I'm taking over. Let me show you how to do this.
Yeah, that was a real challenge putting on those competitive Microsoft products at the time. Gary really took a deep breath and said, "Okay, we'll do this. You want to do it? Let's do it."
Oh man, no, it was good. I'm glad you did, and I'm glad we got Gary's point of view on it all. Even if sometimes he kept it to himself and you just read his face.
Yeah,
after a while, we kind of all got good at reading that adorably scruffy face of his and knowing kind of what he was thinking.
Yeah,
that was a beautiful thing.
He actually, Gary had drafted a book before he died. It's never been published yet.
Really?
And I actually got a copy of the transcript of that book. And he talks very candidly in some cases about watching some of this stuff on our show and being eaten up inside.
Oh, that would be fascinating. Do you think that will ever be published?
There's an issue with his estate, his relatives.
Oh, gotcha.
About not thinking it represents him well. And he's dead. He's not here to
say one way or the other. Yeah.
To say one way or the other. So the last I heard, and again, somebody kindly sent me a copy of it, and it was fascinating reading for me. He never finished it because he died before he got to finish it, actually. But some real insights into what a guy he was, what a gentleman he was, how he thought about these things, and how he did know how to restrain himself from what could have been pretty nasty stuff.
Man, that would be.
I mean, he got hurt pretty badly by other guys, and he didn't fight back.
He did. He did get hurt quite a bit, and that's even from just someone who watched from far away and didn't really know. And
hurt more than most people know. I'd say really hurt, not just from a business point of view. I mean, Gary made a lot of money. That was not his problem.
Right.
But from a psychological, emotional point of view, Gary hurt a lot.
Man.
Very sad.
That is very sad. I mean, I guess the one shining silver lining in all that is that he did inspire a lot of people, and he did inspire a lot of change in the industry for the better. So that's a hell of a lasting legacy, even if it wasn't as much as it should have been or it could have been.
And to think a brain like that died at 52 years old is tragic.
Terribly sad. Terribly sad. Really? I mean, that's not that far away for me, and I'm looking at that. I'm like, I couldn't even imagine.
And I saw Gary go through some rough periods. For a while he was gaining a lot of weight. For a while he was drinking a lot. It took a real toll on a good man.
Yeah, that's terribly sad. Terribly sad.
It is. Yeah.
To switch to brighter notes.
Okay, good.
What are you up to nowadays, Stewart? You've done amazing stuff. You've inspired generations of nerds, including myself, to do really killer things. What are you doing nowadays?
Not a lot. I mean, I don't do a lot in the tech world anymore, actually. I've really been working a lot in healthcare.
That's cool.
Which is really where technology is these days. I mean, everything in healthcare is computers and digital right now. Yeah. So matter of fact, I tried to launch a show a couple of years ago on just technology and healthcare because it's revolutionizing that whole world. I wasn't able to put that together, but I produced quite a few videos now on organ transplants, which I'm really interested in.
That is fascinating.
On artificial organ research, which is phenomenal that's going on right now at UCSF in San Francisco. On alternative healthcare issues. I do some stuff that have nothing to do with technology. I produced a show on music for the piano for PBS.
That's cool.
I'm working right now, actually, on two really fascinating projects. There's an opera about to be premiered in July on the life of Steve Jobs.
There's an opera on Steve Jobs?
Yes, it's going to open in August. July, I think it is, this summer, but the Santa Fe Opera.
I'll be darned.
Phenomenally interesting project, and I'm actually meeting with them this weekend in New York to see how I can help them sort of put this whole thing together. And they're actually putting together around the premiere of this opera a sort of tech conference to talk about great people in the origins of the computer industry.
Yeah,
that's kind of fun. I'm actually working. This is a project obviously close to my heart. A guy who knew Gary very, very well has written a play on his life.
No way.
Yes,
that's
amazing. It's called A Mild Concussion. It pulls at your heart when you read the script. So I'm working with him and getting this play produced. So sort of on the other side, I'm dealing with Jobs and with Gary in different ways to try to get that story told. So doing a bit of that. As I mentioned, working with CNN on this technology show they're doing in June on Tech in the 90s. So I sort of have my hand in stuff.
That's great.
Yeah, no, still pretty much involved. And after I left Chronicles, actually, I talked to you about the archive part of it.
Yeah.
So I spent about 3 years working with archive. And then actually, after I left archive, I made the mistake of joining a startup based in Boston who was going to do archive type stuff only on a for-profit basis.
Oh, gotcha.
A company called Image Fortress. And I absolutely hated it. We were so pressure driven to make money, bring money. I said, I can't deal with it. I quit after a year.
Yeah.
And I had to go to completely the other side. I joined academia and I became a professor of journalism at the University of Nevada, teaching technology and journalism.
That's a good move.
I just had to get out of that whole bloody world of bottom line stuff. So I did that for a couple of years. And then since then, I've really been on my own doing independent production. And I do speeches every now and then.
Yeah.
Go to conferences. I have my Twitter feed, which is where I get my jollies off, letting people know about cool new stuff.
Yeah, making nice posts about robots and such.
Yes,
yep,
exactly.
I follow you on there. I'll put a link to that down here, everybody. It's worth following.
Okay. So that's pretty much what I'm doing, but pretty busy, as I say. Really looking forward to the Steve Jobs project. I want to meet with these people in New York this weekend.
Steve Jobs opera. It seems like people are telling the story of Steve Jobs in every possible medium they can come up with. Once you've got an opera, I think I saw a comic book at one point.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I think we've checked all the boxes off.
Yeah. The opera actually focuses more on the inside, not so much the tech part of Jobs, but the spiritual part of him, his Buddhism bit, his India bit, his sort of internal development, not so much iPod and an iPad type stuff.
Right. Really, so in a lot of ways, kind of the earlier stuff of him
growing
as a person.
Jobs as a human being, not as a technologist, really.
Nice. How well did you know Steve?
That's a long story. I met Steve originally in about 1982 when we first started to launch the national version of Computer Chronicles, which was going to go in 83. As I mentioned, we started looking for money. And Apple had just basically started, and Apple II was becoming, sort of a well-known commodity. They were right down the hill from us in Silicon Valley. So I said, why don't we talk to Apple, see if they want to sponsor this new show called Computer Chronicles?
Yeah.
So some of the people working with me worked with a lot of people at Apple, the marketing people, the sales people, the development people. Everybody, great idea. We should do this. Great idea. We should do it. We're going to present it to Steve, and I think we'll go ahead with it. So we go through the process, and then the guys call me and say, could you come? We want you to make the final pitch to Steve at a board meeting. I said, sure, happy to do it. So I go to the Apple board meeting, and there's Steve up at the top. He was 32 years old, a young punk, very rude. And he said, okay, tell me your story. What's your pitch? I said, well, we're starting this unique weekly half-hour national television show about personal computers. It's the only thing that's like it.
Yeah.
Explain people why they should buy these things, blah, 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 blah. He says, are you going to talk about non-Apple products on your show? I said, well, of course. Well, why the hell should I give you money to talk about my competitors? I said, you put ads in magazines and you tell the magazines they can only put Apple products in their ads? I said, that's not reasonable. He said, I don't think it's a very good idea. He said, rather than give you $250,000, I'd rather spend that money on a Super Bowl commercial. That was the genesis of the 1984 Mac commercial.
Really?
Yes. I said, go ahead, be my guest. So the NFL got the money and I didn't.
Man.
That was my first very negative experience with Steve. I had another bad experience with him some years later when the Lisa came out. And there was a big news conference in the Valley when he was introducing the Lisa. And we had some rather unpleasant discussions and confrontations when I asked him some questions he didn't like me asking. It almost became a sort of physical confrontation situation.
Oh, my.
Steve and I never got along that well. I respected him in many ways. I mean, this guy was brilliant in many ways.
Sure, yes.
Brilliant marketer, brilliant salesman, really tough guy to deal with.
I've heard that a lot.
Two sides to Steve Jobs. I mean, to me, the total opposite of a Gary Kildall, the total opposite even of a Bill Gates, for that matter.
Yeah.
Steve was tough, but he had some insights and was able to buck the trends that people never thought he'd get away with. No floppy disk, no 5 1/4 inch disk, all internet. I mean, the iMac weird design stuff. Obviously, iPad, all that stuff. I'll tell you the cleverest thing I ever saw Steve Jobs do.
Yeah.
When the iPod first came out, if you recall, whatever listening devices you had, if you had your little earbuds, they were black cords.
Yeah.
Steve said, why don't we make ours white? So everybody walking down the street with an iPod will be a commercial for Apple.
So they'll know.
And it was.
It was. Yeah, those white earbuds became iconic. Yeah.
White cords coming down from people's ears. That's an Apple user. It must be a good idea.
Right? You did. It worked.
He did such smart things from a marketing, business point of view. But guys who are really smart like that and buck the trend can sometimes be difficult to deal with. I mean, he's not the only one.
Right.
And actually, I'll give him credit. He pretty much knew what was going on at Apple. We had a lot of CEOs in our show. And the classic scene was this. The CEO would walk into the studio. Here's the computer and the software, the hardware is going to show off. The CEO had no idea how to use anything. There'd be some little guy in a T-shirt underneath the table. Press F1, press F3. It was classic. So, I mean, Steve was a guy who actually knew what was going on.
That's something, right?
A lot of other high-tech CEOs.
You got to give him credit for that, I guess. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Stewart, we're about out of time, but this was awesome. This was literally fantastic for me. Again, thank you for everything you've done, man. I can't stress that enough. I know I said it and gushed and made myself blush a bit earlier on, but thank you. It is.
I can tell you, Brian, it is really gratifying, as I say, to this day, to get messages every single day from people around the world saying the same thing. I mean, I never got paid for it, but this is great payment for what we did.
And it's crazy. I hear about it, and I have people that I talk to will bring up a piece of technology, and they'll bring up the Computer Chronicles, and they'll bring up you, and they'll bring up Gary, and that is amazing to me.
Tell you one other weird story to close with.
Lay it on me, man.
You know who I get calls from all the time?
Who?
Patent lawyers. Because we have the evidence of products that were launched. I get calls up, can you take a deposition because some guy's claiming he was first and we saw it on your show and the other guy was first. Can you take a deposition for us?
That's hilarious.
The Chronicles collection online has become a great trove for lawyers.
Yep. That's kind of funny.
Right.
Well, Stewart,
you never know.
Good luck on everything. Give him some good advice for the Steve Jobs opera, because that sounds kind of hilarious to me, but also potentially very, very cool. I love the idea of that.
I'm going to see the first bit of it this Sunday in New York, actually, so I'll have a better idea what's going on.
Very, very
But it's
cool.
a very high-tech approach to opera, I can tell you that.
Well, man, if I could high-five you through the internet right now, I would. I hope if someone makes an Internet of Things device that's just a hand that can high-five someone. And one day,
cool.
I'll give you a high-five. Thank you so much.
Pleasure talking to you, Brian.
You as well, Stewart.
Bye-bye.